Right now, as you read this, a decision is being made inside your skull. You didn't make it. You won't make it. You'll just watch it happen, and then spend the next few seconds believing you did. In 1983, a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet put electrodes on people's heads, asked them to move their wrist whenever they felt like it, and told them to remember exactly when they decided to move. What he found ended 2,000 years of philosophical debate in a single afternoon. Your brain fires the signal to move your body an average of 550 milliseconds before you consciously decide to do it. That's more than half a second. Your hand was already moving before you chose to move it. But here's the part nobody talks about. That was just the start. In 2008, researchers with better technology found something even stranger. The decision signal doesn't appear 550 milliseconds early, it appears 7 to 10 seconds early. Your brain knows what you're going to do almost a full 10 seconds before you do, which raises a question that nobody has a clean answer to. If your brain decides before you do, who exactly is making the decisions? Libet's experiment sounds simple. It was devastating. He rigged up a clock, a special oscilloscope clock with a dot rotating around the face every 2.56 seconds, and asked volunteers to watch it while flexing their wrist whenever they felt like it. The only rule: remember exactly where the dot was when you first felt the urge to move. At the same time, electrodes on their scalp were measuring electrical activity in their brains. And here's what he found. The brain signal, the readiness potential, the electrical buildup that precedes voluntary movement, was firing an average of 550 milliseconds before the volunteers said they decided anything. More than half a second. Their brains had committed to the action before the conscious intention had even formed. Libet published his findings. Neuroscientists read them carefully. Philosophers had a collective breakdown, because the implications were enormous. If your brain is already moving before you decide to move it, then the feeling of deciding, that crisp, clear sense of "I am choosing this right now," isn't the decision. It's the announcement. Your brain telling you what it already did. A notification sent after the meeting. A headline printed after the vote was counted. But the story doesn't stop in 1983. That was just the opening chapter. In 2008, a team of scientists at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences ran a new version of Libet's experiment, but this time with fMRI scanners. Instead of measuring a simple wrist flick, they asked volunteers to choose between pressing a button with their left hand or their right hand, whenever they felt like it. The researchers weren't just measuring the readiness potential anymore. They were watching the entire brain in real time, region by region, second by second. What they found nearly broke the experiment. Using activity patterns in two brain regions, the frontopolar cortex and the precuneusar, the researchers could predict which hand the volunteer was going to press before the volunteer had any conscious sense of having decided. Not by 550 milliseconds, not by 1 second, by up to 7 seconds. In some trials, 10. The decision was encoded in brain activity almost a full 10 seconds before the person felt themselves choose. Think about that for a second. 10 seconds is not a rounding error. It's not a measurement artifact. It's the length of time it takes you to read 2 full sentences out loud. Your brain knew. You didn't. And nobody told you. The mainstream answer to all of this is, so what? Of course the brain does things before you're conscious of them. That's just how neural processing works. The brain is parallel. Unconscious processes run constantly. The conscious mind is a late arrival. A narrator who shows up after the events and writes them into a coherent story. Neuroscientists call this the interpreter hypothesis, and it has very solid evidence behind it. Michael Gazzaniga, one of the most important neuroscientists of the last century, spent decades studying split-brain patients, people whose 2 brain hemispheres had been surgically disconnected, and found that the left hemisphere constantly confabulates. It makes up explanations for things the right hemisphere did without any input from the left. It doesn't say, "I don't know." It invents a story that feels true, delivers it with complete confidence, and never flags it as invented. In normal brains, this same process is running all the time. Your brain does something, then it tells you why. The explanation feels like memory. But it might be fiction. But that's only half the story. Because Libet himself wasn't ready to surrender free will entirely. He noticed something in his own data that almost nobody talks about enough. Yes, the readiness potential fires before the conscious decision, but there's a window. A brief gap between the moment of conscious awareness and the moment the action actually executes. About 200 milliseconds, but consciousness might be the editor. He called it the veto hypothesis. And it changes everything about how to think about all of this. Because maybe free will isn't about originating your actions. Maybe it's about approving them. Maybe what you call choosing is actually selecting, scanning a stream of impulses your brain generates and deciding which ones get through. The conductor doesn't compose the music, but the conductor decides what gets played, what gets cut, and what the audience hears. This is not a settled question, not even close. In 2016, researchers at Johns Hopkins published a study suggesting the readiness potential itself might not be a decision signal at all, but neural noise. Random fluctuations in brain activity that sometimes tip over into movement, which we then interpret as intention after the fact. Under this model, your brain isn't secretly planning without you. It's generating constant random activity, and consciousness is the filter that occasionally catches a fluctuation and turns it into a choice. You are not the initiator. You are not just the veto either. You are something stranger, a pattern recognition system that finds signal in noise and calls it a self. And then there's the question nobody asks loudly enough. What does any of this mean for the you that's listening right now? Because here's what we actually know. At some point in the next few minutes, you are going to make a decision. Maybe you'll close this video. Maybe you'll keep watching. Maybe you'll think about someone you haven't thought about in years. And somewhere between 7 and 10 seconds before that happens, a cluster of neurons in your prefrontal cortex is going to quietly commit to it. The signal will build, the pattern will lock, and then, only then, will the feeling of deciding arrive. Like a memo delivered after the meeting already ended. Your experience of choosing will feel immediate. It will feel like you. It will feel, above everything else, like freedom. And it will already be slightly behind the fact. Look, this doesn't mean you're a passenger. It doesn't mean nothing matters, or that consequences disappear, or that the choices you make every day aren't real and yours. The most honest answer science has right now is that consciousness and the brain are the same system viewed from two different angles. The neural decision and the felt decision aren't two separate events with a gap between them. They are the same event, described in two different languages, one electrochemical, one experiential. And the tools we have for measuring the experiential side are still primitive compared to the tools we have for measuring the neural side, which means the 7-second gap might say less about free will than it says about the limits of introspection. We are not very good at knowing when we started to want something. We feel certain that we know, but the data says otherwise. But here's what's fascinating. Every person who learns about Libet's experiment has the same immediate reaction: discomfort. Not because the science is hard, because it feels wrong. Because the experience of deciding feels so obviously, undeniably real that the idea of it arriving after the fact, a story told slightly behind the event, feels like something being taken from you, and that feeling, that quiet resistance, might be the most important signal in all of this. Because it means the experience of choosing matters to you in a way that goes beyond whether it's technically accurate. You don't just want to be free, you need to feel free. And that need itself was decided by your brain, long before you knew you had it. Every human being walking the planet right now is living inside the same gap. The feeling of authorship, the sense that the thoughts arise in you, through you, as you. Neuroscience has been quietly narrowing that feeling for 40 years, not to say it's false, but to say it's incomplete. That the you, who feels like it's in charge, is real, just not quite what it thinks it is. Something that runs slightly behind the machinery, something that narrates, edits, and occasionally vetoes. A reader who is absolutely certain they wrote the book. Libet died in 2007. He spent his final years insisting that his own findings didn't end free will, that the veto window was enough. That consciousness, even arriving late, still shapes what happens, that what you do with the gap is still yours. Maybe he was right. Maybe the 7 seconds isn't a sentence, maybe it's a hallway. And what you choose to do in those last 200 milliseconds, the brief window between impulse and action, is the only freedom that has ever existed. Small. Real. Enough. Or maybe you decide